A lot of parents are, working a job. They're busy professionals. They're trying to juggle all that stuff. So, you got to drag the kid out of bed. Maybe they got to take a shower. You got to make the lunch. You got to get them off to school, what have you. Then you got to go get to your job. And I think a lot of burnout, whether it's career burnout or caregiver burnout, comes back to time management as well.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. Now, this week we are actually exploring overcoming burnout. Now, probably not a topic you would expect on a naturally ADHD podcast, but I know as a parent with ADHD, not myself with ADHD, but a child with ADHD, I experienced so much burnout when I was dealing with my son when his symptoms were at his worst. And, it was tough. And so when I was on this gentleman's podcast, I said to him, I need to have you on my podcast because I think it's a super, super important topic to talk about because it is tough raising a child with ADHD. Now, my guest today, David Greenwood, is the author of Overcoming Burnout. Perfect person to speak on this topic. And he really discusses real life strategies for burnout recovery and prevention. His previous book, Overcoming Distractions, profiled many entrepreneurs with adult ADHD, and they shared their stories of success as well as what they needed to do to manage adult ADHD as a busy entrepreneur. David is also an entrepreneur and still runs his content creation business just outside of Boston. And we were just talking about, just before starting this, how much it hasn't snowed in Boston this year. And he bought a snow blower. And to be honest, between you and me, I actually didn't even know that a snow blower existed. Anyway, completely off tangent there. He's focusing a lot of his time on helping people who have experienced burnout recover from burnout and prevent it from happening again. In his book, Overcoming Burnout, he interviewed many people who experienced significant bouts of burnout. He also interviewed many experts in the field and incorporated that advice into the book. It's a street smart look at the topic of burnout. Before officially becoming an entrepreneur in 2005, David served as an executive at one of the most well-known nonprofit organizations in the world. And before that, he spent 16 years in the restaurant business, which resulted in his first encounter of burnout. Now it's time to welcome David Greenwood to the Soaring Child. Hi, David. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm going to send you some pictures of a snowblower so you know exactly what we deal with here in the Northeast.
Yes, no, I'm really, really interested because, as I was saying before we started recording, here in Seattle, we've had a lot of snow this season and Seattle does not do snow well. And we were stuck in our houses and my mum was visiting from Australia and she likes lots of activity. So she was not very happy about that. So maybe I need to buy a snowblower.
you might have to because we have no snow here. What you and I are talking in January 2023. There might be a coating on the lawn. Today we're talking it's 40 plus degrees. So I don't know what's going on up here, but
there's something going on. We're getting your snow. Okay. But I'm really happy to give that back to you. Now, anyway, look, when I spoke to you on your podcast, I knew I had to get you onto ours because there are so many listeners out there today that are probably experiencing a lot of burnout. And, the fact that you wrote a book about it makes you the perfect person to talk about it. And so in the book, you really incorporate a lot of life stories in overcoming burnout. And, I know with your other book as well, Overcoming Distractions. And why do you do that?
I I wrote the book because I couldn't find the book that I needed for myself. And there's a lot of, I guess I'd call it clinical books or books that just talk about the same thing. And then even to a further extent, if you go on social media, you just quite frankly want to bang your head against the wall because it's all go to yoga class and drink some water and blah, 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 and it's much more complex than you and I even probably have the time to discuss here. But I wanted to know what people like me had to do to get themselves out of a situation. I mean, as you mentioned, I do have some experts in the book because I thought that was important, but I wanted to make sure that I put out a street smart book about real situations. I think the other thing is I think we learn and we can relate to real life stories of what people have gone through. And there's people in that book from all walks of life. There's a TV reporter, there's a healthcare executive, there's wedding planners, people in marketing, all kinds of things. And, I mentioned it's complex. Every person's burnout is different, and according to your career, your life, or your personal stories, or your family commitments, or you're a caregiver. So it's important for people to be able to relate to those stories and see what other people did. So I wrote the book that I needed.
I love that you say that because that's exactly what I say about the book that I wrote. And I think that I said the same thing on your podcast because, I think that this was, for me, it was the book that I needed when I was going through it. And by the sounds of things that you needed when you were going through it as well. Can you just explain to listeners before we sort of dive into, talking about burnout and what it means? Can you share a little bit about your story in the situation of you experiencing burnout and what that looked like and what that felt like?
Yeah, I mean, real quick, you alluded to the restaurant business. I didn't know it was burnout back then. I was young. I think I was 30 years old, but I owned a restaurant just outside of Boston. I spent 16 years in the business. It was in one of the wealthiest communities in the region, surrounded by other wealthy communities. So, and I point that out because some of the customer interactions were soul crushing, to say the least. But also it was difficult to get help because a lot of those kids, quite frankly, didn't have to work or they got other jobs. So I found myself on the dish room floor bleeding out of my nose and I couldn't stop it. And that's when
gosh.
and I didn't know. And I write extensively about what I went through. And I was all alone and I didn't have anybody working. And that's part of the problem is I was stressed out for stressed out for longer than 2 days, but it was 2 days of just working from open to close. There was nobody in the store at the time. I got to lock the door. I'm covered in, ice cream and mayonnaise and ketchup. And I'm thinking, is this the way I'm going to go?
Oh, no.
I'm like, I sure hope the funeral director can clean me up.
Oh, to have those thoughts even though, that must have been scary for you.
Yeah. So I did what Tony Robbins calls burn the boats. I saved all my money. I sold the restaurant in like 9 months. I had a game plan. But more recently, you mentioned I worked in the nonprofit world. I was a public relations guy. And after I left the nonprofit world, I went out and opened my own PR firm. And I was what you would call a media relations guy. So there are different facets of public relations, but I was the guy that put the CEOs and executives on TV and got them in the Wall Street Journal and all that stuff. So CEOs and other executives paid me good money to do that. Then somebody invented social media and the whole business of public relations has changed over the years. And people like me, and I'm not the only one, had to continue to pivot and pivot and pivot because the marketing and PR world was just changing so rapidly. And I got tired of it. Then came COVID, and I had a son who was starting a new school basically at the dining room table, and some other family health issues. I'm trying to run a business. Some clients are dropping like flies because their revenue dried up. And I was casually saying to myself for weeks, I'm like, I'm burnt out. And was like 3 a.m. I shot up. I'm like, no, I'm burnt out. I'm like, I can't say this casually anymore. I mean, I'm exhausted. My neck hurts. I'm having digestive issues. I'm having headaches every day. My face hurt. The muscles in my face hurt. So I had to make some substantial changes, and that's when I started looking for books. So I kind of almost pulled myself out of burnout by writing the book.
Okay. No, well, thanks for sharing that story. I mean, you touched on some of the symptoms that you experienced, but I think for listeners out there, can you expand on that? What are some of the symptoms of burnout?
I mean, they're probably almost too endless to list. But it's physical and mental exhaustion. It's being cynical about your situation. You're being resentful, about others in your life or in your business or at your work. You're feeling very resentful. And then, there's the physical symptoms. And I interviewed many people who had symptoms, a lot of digestive issues that the best doctors in the world couldn't explain, which is a shame, because one woman in particular I interviewed went all over the country to all these GI doctors, and not one of them said, have you looked at your stress or anxiety or that they weren't educated on burnout. I'm not bashing the medical community. I'm just saying that they need to be more educated in this. So, but it's just like I said, you could grind your teeth, you could have headaches, you could have digestive issues, there's so many things. And then there's almost the social things. I interviewed one healthcare executive who I asked him, now he actually consults people about burnout because he went through a significant bout of burnout. But I said, what are the first signs of burnout? And he goes, one of the first signs is you stop doing what you love. And I thought that was, and I could resonate with that because there was a lot of things that I actually stopped doing. Like I used to love going out in my yard and making it all green. And I was the guy with the lawn and the bark mulch and all that.
Can you come to my house? I think we need some of that here right now.
I got to get this place in shape first. But he had a heart attack. He worked himself so hard. He had a heart attack. That was one of the things that kind of woke me up is he said, you stop doing the things you love.
No, I can totally relate to that. And I can totally relate to some of those stories prior to, my son being diagnosed. I was an accountant in a past life and I had a very, very, very hectic job. And, I hit a stage in one time in my career where I was actually vomiting from stress and anxiety and, had to go and I ended up on anti-anxiety medication. But a lot of that had to do with the inflammation going on in my body as well. And when I started to go back to school and learn all the things that I know now, I was able to heal my anxiety, heal my gut at the same time as healing my son. So I totally understand all of that. And so, so what did you do when you had that realization? What was one of the first things you did to change your life?
I needed to focus more on me. And I know that's a broad brush. And I like to say there's certain people in the book, certain experts, consultants, that kind of schooled me a little bit. I got a little bit of a beating, but it was well worth it. But one woman said, and it just was worded in such a way. He says people don't take the time to have a professional life that supports their personal goals. So they always they get a job or they build a business or what have you, and then their personal life actually gets the scraps versus taking the time and taking a step back to look and decide what you want your personal life to look like and how can your professional life support that. And that's one thing that I really needed to take a hard look at. I've got a son that that has some attention issues. Let's put it that way. I have an aging father that's requires more of my attention, and I really needed to take a hard look at, the business model and the marketing and PR agency is a lot of hands-on with clients. It's a lot of last-minute stuff. And is this going to work? Or am I going to be sitting in the doctor's office literally having a panic attack because I can't get back to a client? And the answer is no, I don't want that. So I had to take a hard look at that. I think some of the basics, which I did anyways, but just needed to double down. It was exercise. It was going to the gym. It was taking walks. I did a lot of walking during COVID, which I think a lot of people did because the gyms were shut down. It was just taking time to just make sure that I took care of myself first. But it's a long road. I mean, I mentioned the PR business. I as a kid with ADD struggled with finding the right kind of job and career that I could stick to. I went to welding school. I owned a karate school. Spent years in the restaurant business. I worked in the nonprofit world. When I finally opened my PR firm, I really found my wheelhouse. And social media, and we all use it now, but social media, like I said, almost destroyed my business. And it was to the point where I didn't like what I was doing anymore. And that's the other thing where people say, oh, you're overworked and all this stuff. There's so many other things about burnout. You may just hate your job. You may hate your career. You may be in a career that changed and you don't like it anymore. I mean, so that's why I think when people go to Instagram and find this quick little thing about burnout or other mental health issues, I don't think they're doing themselves a service.
And, look, you've talked a lot about, burnout in your career, and, I can totally relate to that. Let's sort of dive into burnout in parenting. It's great when you've got a career that's kind of like outside the house that you can like detach from. When you've got a kid in your house that is creating chaos, which, a lot of our listeners have, and I used to have as well. How do you escape that? Like it's how do you prevent that burnout as a parent?
I'll offer this disclaimer as I'm not a parenting expert.
Yes.
I don't think any of us are at this point, No,
no one's written the real guidebook to parenting. I think we make it up as we go.
Except these super celebrities who just had a baby and all of a sudden they're an expert, right? But I think it's important for us to be in charge. And I know that sounds kind of awkward, but I think you need to be in charge of yourself. You need to be in charge of your emotions. You need to be in charge of how you react. I joined some of these Facebook groups, these ADHD parenting Facebook groups, and I'm quite frankly horrified at the level of anger and other things that I see coming out in these groups towards people's children. It's scary. It's sad.
I agree.
Yeah. I've seen comments like, I can't stand my kid anymore. I mean, I'm just like, this person is at the end of their rope.
Yeah.
So,
and look, I relate to that. I was exactly the same way. And, I that's one of the reasons that I started this podcast, because there are so many parents out there suffering and they don't need to suffer. And so, when you mentioned like you're not a parenting expert, I don't think that matters. You're a burnout expert. And it's like with me with ADHD, I've got people that come to me and go, oh, I've got digestive issues. Are the things that you're teaching me, going to help with digestion and gut? Yes, they do, but I'm not a gut expert, but I can tell you everything that I teach will do really well for your gut. So, you are an expert, no matter, all of the principles that you teach go across parenting, careers, life, marriage. And so just wanted to, put that out there. Now, I know that you advocate for, sorry, actually, I'm going to jump back on the parenting side of things. You were talking about self-care, you were talking about exercise. And, I think that from my experience when, I was going through it, my self-care just went out the window. But I think that is number one. I mean, if mum or dad are not performing at their best, are not healthy, are not, calm, then the whole family is suffering.
Yeah, no, I agree. And somebody in the book said that you need to prepare the mind by preparing the body. The body you need to take care of your body so the mind can actually do the work and kind of, crawling out of burnout. And I agree. I mean, I think it's something as simple as a walk. I work with a lot of, busy professionals, adults with ADHD in a coaching, mentoring situation. And a lot of them, when we start our coaching, mentoring relationship, I find that they haven't even been able to take a simple walk. And I'm like, that's managing ADHD 101 as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
And I think it is so simple. It's beyond simple. But I'll give you an example at Overcoming Burnout. I'd written the book. I still hadn't written the introduction. I was stuck, and I went and walked for like over an hour. It was, I think, March. The air was crisp here in Boston. So there was cold air in my face, and I got back to my office in like an hour or so, and I wrote the entire introduction to the book in one sitting. And the reason I say that is because taking a good walk with some good fresh air in your face, no headphones, no podcast, no music, no nothing, just you and nature, just opens the pathways up. It opens up the thinking, and allows you to think a little more clearly. I mean, when we go for just a simple walk, maybe you do it after the kids are off to school and you just take a half hour or something and just to center yourself. But it just allows you to make more rational decisions. For people with ADHD, it allows the creativity to flow. It allows you to think, more clearly. So I have kind of two rules. Walking, like I mentioned, is sorry to say, we both do podcasts, but don't listen to a podcast, no music. When you go to the gym, yeah, put your favorite playlist on. I don't care what the music is, maybe listen to a podcast, but the healing aspect of just taking a walk and being out there in nature, I think, cannot be understated.
So that's your rule number one. What was the second one that you were going to mention?
The second one was, I think you need to, like I said, I mentioned you need to take charge, but you also need to get better with your own kind of personal time management. A lot of parents are, working a job. They're busy professionals. They're trying to juggle all that stuff. So, you got to drag the kid out of bed. Maybe they got to take a shower. You got to make the lunch. You got to get them off to school, what have you. Then you got to go get to your job. And I think a lot of burnout, whether it's career burnout or caregiver burnout, comes back to time management as well. And if we're worried about getting stuff done, or we're goofing off, or we're procrastinating, or what have you, or we don't take control of our schedule, like we just plug meetings in everywhere we want, then we're not able to actually get our job done. So I think one basic thing is to really just take a step back and analyze how you're operating during the course of the week and pull that apart. I think that's mission critical. I think we may think that in the back of our head, but it's a huge factor in burning out, is just making sure you're being careful and mindful of your time.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing suggestion there. And, breaking it down and just sitting down for 20 minutes and doing your weekly schedule and sticking to it, because you know that you'll have the time to do everything. But when it's floating around in your head, it contributes to the burnout. It contributes to the stress. And so, having it there on a piece of paper and getting it out and planning it accordingly, it's not such a big task, but it could give you so many benefits in the long run.
Well, I mean, think about the scenario of, you're at work, you're busy, you don't manage your schedule properly, and then you go, you know what, I'm going to take some work home for the night. Okay. Now you have a son or daughter that has ADHD, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where your night just turns into a dumpster fire. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you get them to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Okay. Because it was a chore. And then you brought home work. What do you think's going to happen at 11 o'clock at night?
You're going to stress about it.
You're going to grab a beer.
Yeah.
You're going to pull up Netflix, or you're just going to go to bed. And then you're going to go to work, and you're not going to have the work done that you said you were going to do. And it's just this vicious cycle. So
what would be your suggestion in that scenario?
Never goof off.
Never bring home work from work.
I hate to be that simple, but if you got work done, and then you're gonna go, you know what, I got a couple free hours here, but you got some simple things you could get done at work, just get them done.
Yeah.
Just get them done, because you don't know when that's going to backfire on you.
Oh, totally. Now, I know that you advocate a lot for mind, body, sleep, approach when it comes to managing ADHD. I assume that is also the case for burnout.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. I think the ADHD world has heard the sleep speech. Okay. But it is very important. Because if you're running on fumes, then you're going to be short-tempered. Your own executive functions as a parent are going to decline as well. Okay. And you have a bad night's sleep, then you're only setting yourself up for a bad day ahead of you. So the kids don't sleep, you don't sleep. It's going to be a complete train wreck. What we do here in this house is during the week, we all try and get to bed, right at the same time. So I love the Monday night football. I love all that. But, I know the cost of me watching football till 11:30 at night.
Definitely.
So it's important to focus on that. And then the mindfulness as well is, we had mentioned that one woman who had digestive issues. She pulled herself out of burnout by stumbling into a meditation class in New York City, and now she's a full-time meditation teacher. It changed her life that much because it calmed her down. It got rid of her digestive issues, and as she puts it, allowed her to think more clearly, like the walk. Like when you're stressed out and anxious and burned out and going from meeting to meeting and then going home and dealing with the challenges of raising, a son or daughter with ADHD, you cannot think clearly. And even if it's pulling up Spotify for 5 or 10 minutes in the morning and just finding something, just a guided meditation, just to get your brain thinking a little more clearly, I think is another thing that's mission critical. I'm not a 2-hour daily meditation type of person. I'll just be completely upfront with you. But I have found benefits in finding those very short guided meditations to just kind of get you back in tune with yourself.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I think as parents, we focus when we've got kids with challenges, we focus so much on them and getting them better, but really neglect ourselves. And all of the things that we're discussing here in this episode are things that I teach in my program for the parents to implement for their kids. And so you just need to do it for yourself as well. Set your alarm clock 5 minutes earlier, do that small meditation, and you'll probably find that, over a course of a number of, weeks of doing it, you maybe want to increase it to 10 minutes. You maybe want to increase it to 15. I agree. I'm not a 2-hour meditation person either. I don't know if it's, I don't know, something in my brain just can't do it. But, I do definitely focus on that calm, that centering for myself every single day, because we need to come first. It's like putting your life jacket on before you put your kid's life jacket on, if there's going to be a plane crash sort of thing, or, get your oxygen ready before you do that for your kids. And I think that's super, super important. Now, as we wrap up, I just want to ask you the question, what can you offer to parents of children with ADHD who may be just in that state of complete burnout right now and just can't even fathom some of the strategies that we've talked about? Where would they start?
I think they need to build a habit of hitting the pause button. I mean, I think they really do. I think all parents, whether they want to admit it or not, could take a look at certain situations as a parent and tell themselves that they could have handled something differently. You've got the stress of work and you've got other things going on in your life, and your kid comes home and, all of a sudden the house is, in turmoil and they're having a meltdown or what have you, whatever, all the things that come along with having ADHD as a kid, and you have to deal with that. And I think sometimes we get to the point where we say the wrong things. Mm-hmm. We make things worse. We don't really put ourselves in our kids' shoes and understand what they're actually going through, things like the sensory and all the other things with, growing up as a kid with ADHD. So I think the one thing that I could add is that you need to build a habit of just walking away, hitting the pause button, and allowing yourself to understand and learn the lessons from how you handled things in the past. I think it's critical.
Press that pause button. That pause button. And that's not hard. Walk away and press the pause button and reset. Mm-hmm. So to summarize, we've got press the pause button, plan your time, go for a walk, which relates to self-care. But I think let's switch it the other way. Pause, self-care, and plan. I mean, self-care is mission critical, as you said, to really dealing with burnout as a parent, dealing with burnout in your career, dealing with burnout anytime. And I think that it should come first. But David, this has been really, really helpful. And I know that I take away little nuggets from all the different interviews that I do. And I love the pause button. And I can just imagine that pause button in my head. And so when I'm feeling overwhelmed,
it's right next to us.
It's red. It's like, what is it? One of those game show buttons that I can just press and, do the action and say pause out loud if my kid's in front of me. Sorry, mummy's got to pause and walk away. I'm definitely going to take that one away. And self-care, I'm going to get out, the sun's shining. I'm actually going to go for a walk after we finish up here. But I really, really appreciate you coming on today, sharing your knowledge, sharing your story and your experience with all of our listeners. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
On the adult ADHD side, you can just find me at overcomingdistractions.com. There's all the podcasts are there. There's online courses if you actually have ADHD. And then we're building a community as well where people can support each other. For burnout, you can just go to overcomingburnout.net, and there's direct links to the book if people want to get that.
Awesome. And I will say that, just to touch on that, you obviously working with parents, with adults with ADHD, we find a lot of the time that, when kids are diagnosed, the parents start to look inwardly and go, maybe I've got ADHD too. So I am sure there are a lot of listeners out here today that have been diagnosed with ADHD either early on or late in life. And so go and definitely check out David's website for that. I will link all of those in the show notes below. But thank you once again, David, for joining me today. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.